The air in Principal DeWitt's office was chilled to the precise temperature of condescension. It smelled of lemon polish, old leather, and the faint, cloying scent of the gardenias on her desk, their white petals already browning at the edges. I watched a single petal detach and fall onto the polished mahogany, a silent, slow-motion surrender. My own hands were laced together in my lap, my knuckles white. I was making a conscious effort to regulate my breathing, a technique I'd learned for steadying my hands during the delicate work of restoring gold leaf to a crumbling cornice. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The tightness in my chest remained, a solid knot of ice. Across the vast expanse of her desk, an original Hepplewhite that I knew for a fact had been poorly restored in the early 90s, Eleanor DeWitt smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression that never reached her eyes. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on the file splayed open between us. My son's file. Leo's. It's a matter of fit, Mrs. Reyes, she said, the name a deliberate mispronunciation. She knew my name was Elena. She had known it for the 2 years Leo had attended the Atherton Academy. But Reyes was, to her, a name that required no precision. It was the name of a gardener, a janitor, a person who did not matter. Atherton has a certain standard, a particular ethos. We are cultivating the leaders of tomorrow. It requires a certain robustness, a competitive spirit. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on a page. It was a report from the school psychologist, a man whose primary qualification seemed to be his familial connection to the board of trustees. Leo is a sweet boy. Very artistic, the word was delivered like a diagnosis for a terminal illness. But his contributions to the class are minimal. He is withdrawn. His test scores, while adequate, lack the kind of aggressive excellence we expect. I said nothing. I just watched her. I cataloged the way the light from the tall, mullioned windows caught the diamond clips on her ears, the tight set of her jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor of pleasure in her voice. She was enjoying this. This was not a difficult conversation for her. It was a demonstration of power. The office she sat in was a testament to that power. The walls were paneled in 18th-century longleaf pine, imported from a Carolina plantation 200 years ago. I knew this because my firm had been contracted to restore them 5 years before she was even hired. I had spent 6 months in this very room, on my hands and knees at times, painstakingly removing layers of Victorian varnish and modern polyurethane to reveal the wood's original honeyed glow. I had touched every knot, every grain. I knew its history, its secrets. She thought the room belonged to her, but she was just a temporary occupant, ignorant of the substance of the very walls that contained her. She mistook her position for ownership, a common flaw in people like her. This wasn't the first cut, merely the deepest. The cruelty had been a slow, seeping poison from the day we arrived. I was not Atherton material any more than my son was. I drove a 10-year-old Volvo station wagon, a car chosen for its safety rating and its ability to hold architectural salvage, not for its emblem. My clothes were practical, chosen for a life that involved site visits to dusty historical buildings, not for luncheons at the club. At the first parent orientation, a woman whose face was a testament to the taut, expressionless art of a Park Avenue surgeon had looked at my simple linen dress and remarked, "How wonderfully utilitarian." Mrs. DeWitt had overheard, her thin smile signaling her approval of the barb. The slights against Leo were more insidious. An invitation to the birthday party of the board chairman's son that was lost in the mail, a beautiful, intricate diorama Leo had spent weeks creating, a perfect replica of a Globe Theater stage that was accidentally damaged by a cleaner before it could be judged in the school competition. His teacher, a young man with nervous eyes who had once told me Leo was the most creative student he'd ever had, began to write clipped, dismissive notes on his assignments. Lacks focus. Needs to apply himself more conventionally. I saw the pressure lines around the teacher's mouth. He was afraid for his job. He was a good man in a compromised position, and I knew who was applying the pressure. My husband, Alaric, had counseled patience. "These are closed communities, Elena," he'd said gently one evening, his hand covering mine. "They're like ancient courts. You must learn the language, the customs. Let's request a formal meeting. We can smooth this over." He believed in diplomacy, in the inherent reasonableness of people. It was a beautiful quality, but one born of a life where people had always, eventually, deferred to him. He could not conceive of a malice so petty and so absolute that it could not be reasoned with. He did not understand that to Mrs. DeWitt, we were not people to be negotiated with. We were stains to be removed. So I had tried. I'd volunteered for the library committee. I'd baked gluten-free brownies for the bake sale. I'd smiled and nodded during conversations about summering in the Hamptons and the outrageous cost of stabling a pony. I had played the game, all while my son grew quieter, the bright spark in his eyes dimming each morning. I dropped him off in the circular driveway, a brick and ivy monument to inherited advantage. And now, it had all led to this chilled room, this polished desk, this final pronouncement. Mrs. DeWitt leaned forward, her smile gone, replaced by a mask of feigned sincerity. I'm sure you understand. We have a long wait list of families who are a more synergistic fit for our community. Families who are deeply invested in the Atherton legacy. She was talking about money. Donations. The unwritten rule was that full tuition was merely the entry fee. The real price of belonging was paid at the annual donor gala. A new science wing, a digital language lab. We had paid our tuition, on time, in full, but we had not entered the philanthropic arms race. Alaric and I had our own commitments, foundations we supported quietly, without the need for a name carved into a marble plaque. To Mrs. DeWitt, this was another mark against us. Our silence was mistaken for poverty. I've taken the liberty of preparing a list of other schools, she continued, sliding a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock across the desk. Institutions that are perhaps better equipped to handle. Well, to handle Leo's particular needs. Her gaze flickered down to his file again, to the psychologist's report. She sighed, a small, theatrical puff of air. It was the sound of a woman burdened by the mediocrity of others. Then she delivered the line she had been working towards all along. The final, perfect, killing blow. She closed the file. Some children, Mrs. Reyes, she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, as if sharing a sad, immutable truth, are simply not an asset. To put it plainly, his presence here is a net loss to the other students. For our purposes, he is worthless. The word hung in the cold air. Worthless. It did not shatter me. It did not make me cry. Instead, a profound and terrifying calm washed over me. The knot of ice in my chest didn't melt. It solidified, spreading through my veins until I felt like a sculpture carved from frozen marble. The ambient noise of the room faded away. I could no longer hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner or the distant shouts of children in the schoolyard. There was only the ringing silence in my own ears and the sight of Eleanor DeWitt's face, flushed with victory. My mind, the part of me that assesses stress fractures in old timber and the chemical composition of failing mortar, became hyper-focused. I observed her. I saw the tiny capillaries in her cheeks, the way her lipstick had bled almost invisibly into the fine lines around her mouth. I saw the self-satisfied glint in her eyes, the look of a predator that has just successfully culled the weakest member from the herd. She mistook my silence for defeat. She thought she had won. I rose from my chair. My movements felt slow, deliberate. I did not take the list of schools she had offered. I left it sitting on the gleaming expanse of mahogany. "Thank you for your time, Principal DeWitt," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any inflection. It was the voice I used to deliver a structural assessment. Factual. Final. I turned and walked out of her office, closing the heavy oak door softly behind me. The click of the latch was the only sound. I did not go straight home. I drove to the waterfront, to a small park overlooking the bay, and I watched the gulls circle in the gray afternoon light. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford. Tears were a surrender, and the war had just been declared. The word worthless echoed in my head, but I did not let it attach itself to the image of my son. Leo, with his wild imagination and his gentle hands, who could spend hours building entire cities out of cardboard and tape. Leo, who drew fantastical creatures with such detail and life that they seemed ready to crawl off the page. Leo, who saw beauty in rust and peeling paint and the intricate patterns of a snail's shell. He was not worthless. He was priceless. What was worthless was the system that judged him so. The hollow institution, the brittle woman who ran it. They were the ones with the structural decay. They were the ones who needed to be condemned. I sat in my car for a full hour, not moving, simply thinking. My fury was a cold, clean fire now, burning away all the grief and fear. It was being forged into something sharp and hard. When I finally started the engine, I knew exactly what I had to do. I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel. Leo was in his room, sitting at his small desk, a piece of charcoal in his hand. He was drawing. He didn't look up when I came in, so absorbed was he in his work. I stood in the doorway and watched him, my heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. On the paper was a magnificent, soaring dragon, its scales drawn with painstaking detail, its wings outstretched as if about to take flight. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, a small, reflexive motion that told me more about his days at that school than any report card ever could. "Hey, sweetie," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Mom? Is everything okay?" I knelt down beside him and looked at his drawing. "It's beautiful, Leo. Absolutely magnificent." A small smile touched his lips. "I'm going to make him breathe fire. I have no doubt you will," I said. "Listen, I have an idea. How would you feel about taking a few days off from school? We could go to the museum, maybe visit that old shipyard you like." His face lit up. Really, I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I think we could both use a break from Atherton that night, after Leo was asleep. I did not go to Alaric. Not yet. I went to my study. I opened my laptop and began my research. I searched for educational trusts, private school charters, holding companies, and the intricacies of endowments. My work as a conservator had made me a meticulous researcher. I knew how to follow the tangled threads of ownership and history, whether of a building or an institution. Atherton, for all its posturing, was a business. A nonprofit, yes, but a business nonetheless. It had assets, debts, and a board of directors. It had vulnerabilities. For 2 hours, I worked, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I compiled a dossier, a blueprint of the school's financial skeleton. Then, and only then, did I go to find my husband. Alaric was in the library, reading by the fire. He looked up as I entered, his brow furrowing with concern when he saw my face. "Elena? What is it? What happened at the meeting?" I didn't rush. I didn't let the emotion pour out in a torrent. I sat down in the armchair opposite him. I calmly and precisely recounted the conversation with Mrs. DeWitt. I repeated her words, including the backhanded compliments and the dismissive tone. I laid out the pattern of slights against Leo, the lost invitation, the damaged project. I presented it not as a grieving mother, but as a professional delivering a damage report. I showed him the photographs I'd taken of Leo's diorama before it was destroyed. I detailed the change in his teacher's demeanor. I concluded with her final assessment of our son. When I finished, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Alaric had not moved. His book lay forgotten in his lap. The gentle, diplomatic man I loved was gone. In his place was a prince of a very old and very powerful house, a man whose ancestors had crushed armies and toppled kingdoms. His eyes were like chips of flint. He was silent for a long time. Then he asked a single, quiet question. "What do you want me to do?" I met his gaze. I had already rehearsed the answer in my mind. It was simple. It was absolute. "I want to buy his school," I said. Alaric did not laugh. He did not question my sanity. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Then that is what we will do." The next morning, he made a single phone call to a man named Mr. Staub, his family's chief financial advisor in Zurich. The conversation was brief and conducted in a calm, almost placid tone. But I knew that on the other end of that line, gears of immense power were beginning to turn. Forces were being mobilized that Eleanor DeWitt, in her small world of bake sales and legacy admissions, could not possibly comprehend. A few days later, an emergency meeting of the Atherton Academy Board of Trustees was convened. It was held not in the school's stately boardroom, but in the downtown offices of their legal counsel. The mood, I was later told by a source, was one of barely contained panic. The school's endowment manager, a portly man named Mr. Abernathy, was sweating through his suit jacket despite the aggressive air conditioning. He explained, in a trembling voice, that a new, highly aggressive investment entity, a shell corporation based in Luxembourg called the Serafina Group, had, over the course of 72 hours, acquired a controlling interest in the private equity fund that held the majority of the school's long-term debt. Furthermore, The Serafina Group had served notice of its intent to call in that debt, all of it, effective immediately. The school did not have the liquid capital to cover it. The move was, Abernathy stammered, financially inexplicable. It was hostile. It was predatory. It was, in the cutthroat world of high finance, a masterstroke of brutal efficiency. The chairman of the board, a man who had inherited his father's fortune and his grandfather's arrogance, blustered about fighting it. But the school's lawyers were quick to disabuse him of that notion. The contracts were ironclad. They were cornered. The Serafina Group had offered a single, non-negotiable solution. They would forgive the debt in exchange for a complete transfer of the school's charter, property, and all associated assets. In effect, they were forcing a sale. The board was being wiped out. Their little kingdom, built on generations of exclusion and quiet handshakes, was being dismantled by an invisible, unstoppable force. They had no idea who was behind it. They threw around names: Russian oligarchs, a rival school's benefactor, a tech billionaire. My name, Elena Reyes, the quiet mother of the withdrawn, worthless boy, never once entered their minds. The annual donor gala was Mrs. DeWitt's coronation. It was the night she cemented her power, gliding among the city's elite, accepting their praise and their checks. This year, she was particularly triumphant. She had successfully purged the school of an undesirable element. She was radiant in a sheath of dark green silk, her diamonds flashing under the crystal chandeliers. I was not there. Alaric was not there. We were a problem that had been solved. She took to the stage to deliver her keynote address, a speech about tradition, excellence, and the bright future of Atherton. She was at the height of her power, bathed in the adoring glow of the people whose approval she craved above all else. It was then that a man in a simple, dark, exquisitely tailored suit walked calmly up the side steps of the stage. He was not a security guard. He moved with an authority that needed no uniform. It was Mr. Staub. He had flown in from Zurich that morning. He approached the podium and handed Mrs. DeWitt a slim leather folder. She stared at him, her flowery speech faltering on her lips. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight with annoyance. "This is a private event." Mr. Staub did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He leaned towards the microphone. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice carrying a faint, precise Swiss-German accent that filled the suddenly silent ballroom. "My name is Julian Staub. I am the legal representative for the Serafina Group, the new owners of the Atherton Academy." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Mrs. DeWitt's face went chalk white. She looked out at the sea of confused faces, her own donors, her allies, and saw only shock. Her carefully constructed world was dissolving in real time. "As of 6 p.m. this evening," Mr. Staub continued, his tone as dry as a legal brief, "the existing board of trustees has been dissolved. All administrative contracts are under review. There are to be some significant changes in leadership. The Serafina Group is committed to a new vision for this institution, one based on inclusivity, compassion, and the fundamental belief in the intrinsic value of every child." He paused, letting the words land. Then he said, "To that end, it is my great pleasure to introduce the new chair of the Board of Trustees for the Atherton Academy." He turned and gestured to the side of the stage. And I walked out into the light. I was not wearing my work clothes. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, the kind of quiet power dressing that makes no overt statement but is nonetheless unassailable. I wore a single piece of jewelry, a sapphire and diamond brooch that had been in Alaric's family for 300 years. It was a subtle signal, one that the old money crowd in that room would understand instantly. This was not new money. This was something else entirely. I did not look at Mrs. DeWitt. I walked directly to the podium. Mr. Staub stepped aside. I looked out at the stunned faces of the city's elite. I saw the board chairman, his mouth hanging open. I saw the woman who had called my dress utilitarian, her hand frozen halfway to her champagne flute. And then, my eyes found Alaric. He was standing quietly at the back of the room, not in the spotlight, just watching me. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A wave of strength washed through me. Then, and only then, did I allow my gaze to fall upon the woman standing beside me. Eleanor DeWitt was staring at me. Her face was a mask of utter, horrified disbelief. The confident, imperious principal was gone. In her place was a terrified woman who was finally, for the first time in her life, completely powerless. She was looking at me, the quiet woman in the sensible car, and seeing not a scholarship case to be managed, but the architect of her complete and total ruin. The smugness was gone. The condescension